The order to leave her came over the wire in the same flat, polite voice, the very I used to read the weather. Sun cohort Taria Vaxer. Spinal column severed at the third vertebra. Combat function ended. Honor function completed. All assets disengage. Repeat. All assets disengage. I was 3 meters from her when it came through. The ridge above us was still burning. Somewhere past the smoke, a Varii hornpiece played the 4 notes that mean withdraw with dignity, and the Varii line peeled off the rocks in that long, loping run they have, all elbows and bone plate, the war children carrying the wounded who could still be carried, the lance spears covering the rear. They moved past her without looking. The sub-commander walked over her body the way you walk over a fallen pack, careful not to step on it, but not stopping either. Taria was on her back. Her eyes were open. The marrow lance had taken her between the 2nd and 3rd dorsal plate, a wound the size of my thumb. No blood because the marrow don't leave blood. They leave a kind of frost that smells like ozone. Her right hand was clenched around the bone hilt of her short spear, and she could not let it go because she could no longer feel her hand. She saw me see her. She did not speak. I should say something here about my training. The 32nd Auxiliary Mudfoot, to anyone who's been in the company more than a week, does not turn back. Not for Varii, not for anyone. We were brought to this rock to plug holes in the Varii line, to die where they needed us to die, and to be grateful for the ration credit. The Varii don't think we should bother carrying our wounded either. They think it's a waste of mass. They've told us so. They've put it in writing. I should also say that I was tired. 11 hours on the ridge. 2 reloads left in my carrier. A crack in my left knee plate that I'd been pretending wasn't there since dawn. My radio was full of the sub-commander's voice repeating disengage, disengage, and my squad leader's voice telling me to fall in, and somewhere underneath both of them, the long mineral whisper of the marrow as they rebuilt themselves in the smoke. I should say I thought about it. I didn't. I crossed the 3 meters between us. I unclipped my carrier and laid it across her chest like a blanket, ceramic plates down. I worked her fingers off the spear hilt one at a time. They were cold. I told her I was Sergeant Eli Ravenel, 32nd Mudfoot, and that I was sorry about her hand, and that I was going to lift her now, and that this was going to hurt me more than it hurt her because she couldn't feel anything and I was about to learn how heavy a Varii really is. She made a sound, just one, a breath out through her teeth, which on a Varii is the closest thing to a laugh you'll ever hear in a war zone. I got her on my shoulder. The hornpiece played the 4 notes a second time, fainter. The Varii were gone. I started walking the wrong way. The refinery had been built by the Varii themselves, 2 centuries back, when this moon was just a mineral claim and not a graveyard. They'd quarried it out of the white stone of the ridge and lined it with the ceramic they made on site, a pale, dense, glassy material, almost translucent in the right light, that the marrow could not pass through. The Varii didn't know that yet in those days. They'd built with ceramic because it was cheap. Now most of the colony was gone, and the refinery stood half-fallen in the basin like a row of broken teeth. And I aimed for it, because it was the only roof left standing within a kilometer, and because I remembered, somewhere in the back of my head, a thing one of our engineers had said about ceramic and the marrow during a briefing I had only half listened to. I covered the open ground in a low jog. Taria did not weigh as much as I'd feared. The Varii build is hollow-boned like a bird, which is one of the things that lets them move the way they do. What weight she had was muscle and plate, and her plate had taken the lance strike clean, so the front of her was intact. I could feel her breath against my collar. Slow, regular. She was not dying. Varii don't die from spinal damage the way we do. Their nervous system is twinned, and the secondary cord runs along the breastbone. She was paralyzed from the shoulders down, and she was going to stay that way for hours, maybe days, maybe the rest of her natural span. But she was awake. She was watching the sky over my shoulder, and I knew without asking what she was watching for. I made the refinery doors in 4 minutes. They were the high-wide kind the Varii used for ore carts, and one of them was hanging off its hinges. I shouldered through. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old metal and the faint chemical sweetness of Varii preservative gel, the stuff they pack their wounded in when they bother to pack their wounded. A kiln stood against the far wall. A real one, the old kind, a half-cylinder of ceramic 3 meters long, set in a cradle of iron, big enough for 2 grown men to lie down inside if they were friends. The mouth was open. The interior was clean. Whoever had run this place last had emptied it before they left. I laid Tarja down beside the kiln. I checked her airway, her pupils, the slow pulse at the base of her throat where the Varii carry it. I unclipped her optic, the long Varii combat piece that they wear sideways across the brow, more like a crown than a visor, and held it up to my own eye. The world through it went pale and cold and full of moving things. The marrow were already in the basin. I counted 6. They moved between the rocks with that wrong, sliding gait, like smoke pretending to be a person, the outline of bone underneath the smoke and the suggestion of a face that I tried very hard not to look at. They were not running. They were sweeping. They knew something had been left behind. I lowered the optic. I looked at Tarja. Her eyes met mine. "They will be at the door in 5 minutes," she said. It was the first sentence she had spoken. Her voice was lower than I expected, and the Varii consonants came soft because she was tired. "Sergeant Ravenel, you should run." "I know," I said. I picked her up. I put her into the kiln. She did not fit easily. Varii are tall. She would have come up to my collarbone standing, and she was longer in the torso than a human, which is where most of the height goes. I had to bend her knees and turn her shoulders. The kiln was just wide enough. I packed my carrier under her head as a pillow and put her optic on her chest where she could see it. I closed the kiln mouth with the iron screen that had been propped against the wall, old mesh fine, a thing for filtering ash. I packed the screen edges with dust from the floor, which was full of fine ceramic powder and old iron filings from the cradle below the kiln, and which the marrow, if the briefing had been correct, would not enjoy crossing. Then I walked back out into the main floor and sat down with my back against an upturned ore cart and waited. I could hear her breathing inside the kiln, slow, even, steady. Varii do not panic. Varii do not weep. Varii do not ask their gods to save them, because the only god the Varii have is the chain of command, and the chain of command had already disengaged. I sat there with my rifle across my knees and counted the things I had left. 1 Mudfoot service rifle, 28 rounds. 1 bone short spear, Varii issue unblooded. 1 ceramic plate carrier, currently on her. 1 iron multi-tool. 1 field tin of issue-grade coffee, factory sealed, that I had been carrying in my left thigh pocket for 9 months, and had not yet opened because I kept telling myself I would open it the morning I knew the war was won. 1 lullaby. I started humming it, not loud. Just the first 3 bars, the part my mother used to do while she wiped flour off her hands. The marrow can hear, the briefing said, but only the loud things, the radio, the shouting, the engines. They are deaf to the small noises a human makes when he is trying to be brave. The first one came through the door at 4 minutes, 50 seconds. I don't want to make this part bigger than it was. People who weren't there always want the fight to be a story, and the fight isn't a story. The fight is 6 minutes and 41 seconds of work, most of it done at a distance of less than 3 meters, in a building made out of ceramic and dust. I had one advantage. The optic was on her, but I had the cradle. The cradle was iron. I had pried a length of it off, 20 centimeters of black bar, rough at one end where it had broken, smooth at the other where my hand fit. I had filed a finger-thick groove down its length and packed the groove with the ceramic powder and the iron filings from the floor, and I had bound the whole thing to the muzzle of my rifle with the wire from a broken light fixture. It was the ugliest weapon I had ever held. The Varii would have spat at it. my old drill sergeant would have spat at it. It was a stick with a worse stick taped to the end. When the first marrow came through the door, I shot it twice in the center of where the chest should have been. The first round did nothing. The second round, which carried the breath of iron filings ahead of it in a small gray cloud, made the thing stop. It did not fall. It came apart. It came apart slowly, like a sketch being erased one line at a time, and the last thing to go was the suggestion of a face, and I did not look at the face. I have made myself a rule in the years since about not looking at the faces. The second one came in low. I shot it in the knee. The same gray cloud, the same slow undoing. The third one was faster. It came in along the wall, and it took my rifle out of my hands before I could turn, and the muzzle skittered across the floor and into the dark, and the thing was on me. I felt its cold across my face, not a touch exactly, more like a shadow that had weight. I went sideways and down and rolled and came up with the short spear in my left hand because my right hand was numb from where the cold had crossed it. I drove the spear into the place where its hip would have been. The spear was bone. Bone does nothing to a marrow, but the spear shaft had been wrapped at the grip with iron wire. I do this for the look of the thing, not for any function, and the iron wire was enough. The marrow came apart around the spear like fog around a hand. I picked my rifle up. I went back to my ore cart. I sat down. 3 more came. The 4th I shot at the door. The 5th I waited on until it was 4 meters in because I had only 9 rounds left and I could not afford to miss. The 6th was the smart one. It did not come through the door. It came down through the roof, where one of the high vents had broken open, and it landed between me and the kiln, and it stopped there, and it looked at the kiln. The thing about the marrow is that I think they know. I have argued about this with engineers and with priests, and with the kind of officer who likes to argue about things over brandy in a tent. The engineers say no. The marrow were a weapon, a thing made by a people who are now dust, a condensate ghost driven by the recorded mind of a long-dead soldier, and they have only the appetites that were given them. The priests say maybe. They say there is enough mind in there for the body to remember being a person, and enough person to remember the small cruelties. The officers say it doesn't matter as long as the iron works. I say the 6th one looked at the kiln. I say it knew Taria was in there. I say it took 1 slow step toward the kiln, and then a 2nd step, and then it stopped, because I had stood up and put myself between the kiln and the thing, and I had said, out loud, in the voice my mother used on a stray dog that had come up onto our porch one summer. No. I do not know why this should have worked. I have stopped trying to explain it. The thing turned its face toward me. I held the rifle up in both hands with the iron-packed muzzle pointed at the suggestion of its throat. I said, no, not this one. It came at me. I had 8 rounds left. I used 5 of them. It came apart at my feet, and I sat back down on the ore cart, and I started to shake. And from inside the kiln Taria said, very quietly, Sergeant Ravenel, you are still humming. I had not noticed. I stopped. I asked her after a minute what the song was supposed to be in her language. She thought about it. The Varii take a long time to translate, because their grammar is built on rank and ours is built on time, and the conversion is not clean. There is no song like it, she said finally. We do not sing to our young. The creche mothers do not have the throats for it. What does the song say in your tongue? I told her. It was a small old song about a child whose mother is putting him to bed and promising that the morning will come. It rhymes in the original, and the rhyme is the kind a tired adult invents to make a tired child laugh. I gave her the words flat without the rhyme, because I did not have it in me to translate poetry that night. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, you stayed behind for me because of this song. No, I said, I stayed because you were there. She did not answer. I leaned my head back against the ore cart. Somewhere outside, far away, I heard the 4-note horn piece again, faint, moving south. The Varii had crossed the river. They were not coming back. We talked through the night. It was not the kind of talking either of us was used to. The Varii speak the way they fight, in formations, in ranks, with the heavy words at the front and the lighter words covering the flanks. They do not chat. They do not, in their language, have a word for chat. Mudfoot are worse. We mostly speak in numbers and curses, the numbers for the things we are about to do and the curses for the things we have just finished doing, and there is not a lot of room in either category for someone who cannot move and someone who has to stay awake to keep her from being eaten. So we made a new kind of talking. I told her about the farm in Salter County where I had grown up, where my mother kept geese, and where my father had built a small kiln of his own behind the barn for firing the clay tiles he sold to the neighbors. I told her about the geese. The geese had been mean, and one of them had once chased me up onto the roof of the smokehouse and kept me there for 2 hours, and my mother had laughed so hard she'd had to sit down. Tarja asked what a goose was. I had to describe it twice. The second time, she made the breath-through-teeth sound again. She told me about her creche, about the long stone hall where the Varii children are raised in batches of 40, and about her batch sister Vesk, who had been killed 3 years ago in the same kind of action we were in now, and about how the creche mothers had told them not to mourn the dead because the dead had completed their function. She said this without bitterness, the way you would describe weather. I asked her if she had mourned Vesk anyway. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said, I sang for her quietly, in my room. I did not know what a song was. I made one. It had no words. I asked her how it went. She tried to hum it. The Varii throat is built wrong for humming. The resonance is in the wrong place, like a horn played by a beginner. She got 4 notes out and then stopped. They were the same 4 notes the Varii hornpiece had played at the withdrawal, but slower and in a different order, and they were not a soldier's notes anymore. They were a song. That is the song, she said. I made it from the hornpiece. I changed the order. It's a good song, I said. It is not allowed, she said. I told her that on the farm in Salter County, when my mother sang the bedtime song, it was usually because we had had a bad day and the geese had been mean, and the kiln had cracked, and my father had not made his quota of tiles for the month. I told her that the song was not allowed in the geese's opinion, and not allowed in the kiln's opinion, and definitely not allowed in the opinion of the man who came to count our tiles, but that my mother had sung it anyway, and that some things are not allowed by anyone, and you do them. Tell me about Vesk, I said after a while. She did not answer for a long time. I had begun to think she had decided not to. Then she said, very carefully, the way a person climbs down a ladder in the dark. Vesk was small, the smallest in the batch. The creche mothers thought she would not survive the first winter. Varii creches are not heated above a certain age because the cold builds the bone plate, and they were prepared, the way creche mothers are prepared, to record her as ended and move on. I was assigned to her bunk, not as a sister, as a monitor. The creche mothers wanted a daily report on whether she was breathing. How old were you? 6 Varii years, 12 of yours. What did you do? I reported every morning that she was breathing. Then I went back to the bunk and I took my own blanket and I put it over her on top of hers. Then I lay down beside her on the cold side of the bunk. Then I went to drill. Then I came back. Then I checked her again. Then I lay down beside her again. I did this for the whole winter. The creche mothers did not catch me until the 3rd month, and by then it was too late to take the blanket back, because the rule is that anything a war child has given to another war child becomes the property of the receiving child. What did the creche mothers do? They reprimanded me. I lost 2 days of mess. They did not take the blanket. Vesk lived through the winter. She grew. By the time she was 8, she was taller than I was. She made Sun cohort the same year I did. We served in the same lance for 9 years. And then she was killed. And then she was killed, in an action much like this one, a different moon, a different ridge, the same retreat order on the same channel in the same flat voice. I did not stay behind for her, Eli. I followed the order. I marched with the column. The hornpiece played the 4 notes and I marched, and Vesk was on the ridge and she had taken a wound and she could not move, and I marched. I did not turn. I did not turn back. She was quiet. I made the song for her that night, in my bunk, with my face in the blanket so that the monitor would not record the noise. The blanket was the same blanket. It was very old by then. It still is. Where is it now? In the regimental store, with the rest of my personal effects. The store will be cleared when my name is struck from the roll. The blanket will be incinerated along with everything else. That is the protocol. No, it won't, I said. We'll get it. Eli. We'll get it. She did not argue. She turned her head very slightly, the only movement she had, and looked at the cradle of iron beside her, and the dust on the floor, and the rifle across my knees with its ugly iron-packed muzzle, and the ore cart between us. Then she looked back at the ceiling. She did not speak again for almost an hour. When she did, she said only this: Vesk would have liked the song you hum. Maybe she'll hear it somewhere. No, we do not believe that. You don't have to believe it. The song doesn't ask. She made the breath through teeth sound, very softly. Tarja was quiet. Sergeant Ravenel, she said. Eli. Eli, why are you doing this? Doing what? You are talking to me. You are not sleeping. You are humming a song that the things outside can hear. You should be resting. You should be planning. You should be deciding which of us to feed to them at dawn. Neither of us, I said. That is not a plan. It is the only one I have. She thought about that for a while. Then she said very carefully, on my world, when an officer of my rank is broken in the field, the protocol is that a subordinate of the same house carries her to a high place and unhooks her armor and waits with her until the cold comes. It is not considered an unkindness. It is considered the last act of service. The subordinate sings nothing. The subordinate does not speak. The subordinate goes home afterward and is not asked about it. Do you understand? I understand. You are not my subordinate. No. You are not of my house. No. Then I do not understand what you are doing. I do not have the word for it. I have looked in your language, in my language, and I do not have it. Maybe there isn't one, I said. She made the breath through teeth sound again, softer this time. There has to be one, she said, or else I am imagining all of this. The second day was worse. 2 marrow came through the back wall, a wall I had not thought could be breached, because it was ceramic, but they had found a seam in the mortar where the ceramic met the rock, and a marrow can pass through any gap a child's finger can fit. I lost 1 round and most of my left ear lobe to the first one. The second came so close to the kiln that I went at it with the iron bar in both hands and beat it apart against the cradle. My arm was numb to the elbow for an hour afterward. I packed the seam with dust and filings and curses and went back to the ore cart. The radio came alive once in the late afternoon. A very high voice, not the sub-commander's, someone older said my name. Said it in the wrong order, family name first, the way they do. Ravenel Eli, 32nd Auxiliary. Withdraw protocols are in effect. Sun cohort Vaxer is recorded as ended. You are recorded as in violation of the withdrawal order. You will be reprimanded. You will withdraw immediately to the riverline. You will not be resupplied. You will not be retrieved. Confirm. I held the handset for a long time before I answered. This is Sergeant Ravenel. Sun cohort Vaxer is not ended. I am holding the refinery at grid 471. I have killed 8 marrow in the last 20 hours. I am going to keep holding the refinery. I do not require resupply. I require an evacuation for 2. There was a long silence. Then the older voice said, in a tone I will think about until I am dead. For 2. For 2. The radio cut. It did not come back on. I went back to the kiln. I told Tarja what I had said. She closed her eyes. The closing of a varii eye is a slower thing than ours. They have two lids, the inner one milky, the outer one thick, and the slow closing of both of them in sequence is the way a varii pray. She did not pray often. She prayed then. "You will be punished," she said when she opened them again. "Probably. You will lose your rank. Probably. You will lose your service credit, your farm, your mother's farm." "My mother's been dead 8 years, Tarja." She was quiet. "I am sorry," she said. "It's all right. The farm went to my brother. He kept the geese." "Your brother kept the geese?" "He did." "That is good," she said. "That is good." It was the first time I had heard a varii say a thing was good without a function attached, without saying it served the chain of command or the war or the house. Just good. The geese were good. The fact of the geese existing was good. I sat with that for a while. The war child came in just before dawn on the third day. I heard him before I saw him. The varii have a particular way of moving when they are wounded, a kind of stutter in the gait where the bone plate of the hip catches against itself, and I knew the sound of it from the ridge. I came up off the ore cart with the iron bar in both hands and the rifle slung across my back, and I went to the door very slowly, because if it was marrow, no amount of slow was going to help me, and if it was varii, no amount of fast was going to help me either. He was leaning against the outside wall. He was 11 or 12 years old in his species reckoning, which would have made him 6 or 7 in mine. He had a courier's harness across his small chest, and a hornpiece and a leather frog on his hip, and a piece of someone else's shrapnel buried in the meat of his right thigh, and he had been walking on it for what looked like most of a day. He had a piece of paper folded into his left fist. He looked at me. He did not say anything. He had the eyes of a child who has been told that the next adult he sees will be the adult who tells him what to do, and he was waiting. I put down the bar. I knelt. The varii do not kneel. It is a posture they associate with submission and have, accordingly, removed from their soldiers' training, and the kneeling startled him. I held my hand out, palm up. "Are you alone?" I said, in varii slowly. He nodded. "Who sent you?" He held out the paper. I took it. It was not from the varii high command. It was from the sub-commander who had pronounced Tarja ended, the same flat voice from the radio, in handwriting now, on a piece of regimental dispatch paper. The note was 3 lines long. The first line was an apology for sending a child courier. The second line said that the varii column had crossed the river and was now beyond the range at which they could provide any support, retrieval, or acknowledgement to Sergeant Ravenel of the 32nd Auxiliary. The third line said, "The child Pelser does not have a function. If you can use him, use him. If you cannot, do what is required." I read it twice. I folded it. I put it in my breast pocket. I helped him inside. I sat him on a crate in the corner of the refinery floor, and I cut the harness off him with my multi-tool, and I dug the shrapnel out of his thigh with the same tool. And he did not cry, because varii war children do not cry, but he was breathing hard and his eyes were locked on a point past my shoulder, and he was trying very hard to be the kind of soldier the creche mothers had told him to be. "You're going to be all right, Pell," I said. He did not answer. "What does it say?" Tarja said from inside the kiln. She had heard the voices. "It says there across the river." "What else?" "It says he doesn't have a function." She was quiet for a beat. "Pelser," she said. Then she said something else in varii, a long sentence in a register I had not heard her use before, slow and formal, the way a person reads a poem in a language she has only just been told she is allowed to read. The war child's eyes moved off the point past my shoulder and onto her voice. He sat up a little straighter on the crate. "What did you say to him?" "I told him his function is to be with us until we are evacuated." "That's a function." "It is the function I have given him. I am no longer son cohort. I am no longer recorded. I am, by the chain of command, a thing that can no longer assign functions, so this assignment is not allowed. But she was right, Eli. Some things are not allowed by anyone. The war child Pell did not understand the human and Varii running together in our conversation, but he understood enough of his own language to understand that he had been given an order by a Sun cohort. And to a Varii war child, a Sun cohort's order is the bedrock of the world, and he sat up straighter still on the crate, and he saluted, which is a thing they do with both hands across the breastbone, and he said, "Yes, Sun cohort." "Taria," she said, "not Sun cohort, Taria." The child hesitated. The word was not a word he had ever been allowed to use to a senior. He said it slowly, like a person who has been handed a knife and is not sure which end to hold. "Yes, Taria." "Good. Now, Sergeant Ravenel is going to give you water. Then you are going to sleep. Then when you wake, you are going to listen to him, because he is going to tell you a great many things that are also not allowed, and the world will be better for it." I gave the child water. He drank it. He slept on the crate with his harness folded under his head, and he did not stir for 6 hours, and that was when the marrow came. The third day, the marrow came in numbers. There were 9 of them. I had 4 rounds. I had the iron bar. I had the spear with the iron wire on the grip, and a length of mesh screen I had pried off a vent. I had a Varii war child asleep on a crate, and a Varii Sun cohort sealed inside a kiln, and a knot in my gut the size of a fist. I woke Pell with my hand on his shoulder. He came up out of sleep the way the Varii do, all at once, without the slow human swim toward the surface. His eyes locked on mine. I did not have time to be gentle. "Pell, listen to me. There are 9 of them coming through the basin. I need you in the kiln with Taria. I need you against her good side. I need you to hold her optic up so she can see what I cannot. I need you to call out to me in Varii loud, the way the spotters do when they come close. Do you understand?" He understood. I lifted him into the kiln. He was light. He weighed nothing. I packed him in along Taria's left flank, where the ceramic met the iron, and I put the optic in his hand and I closed his fingers around it. I told him, "Do not come out of this kiln." I told him 3 times. I told him, "Do not come out of this kiln for me." He looked at me the way a child looks at the adult who has just removed a possibility from the world, and he nodded, and I sealed the mesh screen back across the kiln mouth and packed the seams with dust. Then I went back to the ore cart and waited. I should be honest about this part. I do not remember most of it. There is a kind of clarity that comes over a person who has decided to die in a particular place for a particular reason, and the clarity is not the same as memory. I remember the first 3 I killed because I was still counting rounds, and because Pell was calling out their positions in his clear high voice from inside the kiln, left of the door, 2 meters low, and I was firing where he told me to fire, and the iron-packed rounds were doing the work. I remember the 4th because it took my left thumb off at the 2nd knuckle, and the cold of its hand on my hand is the kind of thing that stays with you. I remember the 5th because I killed it with the iron bar, and I was screaming, and the screaming was tearing my throat. And from inside the kiln Taria was calling my name in the steady voice of someone trying to bring a horse out of a burning stable. The 6th one I do not remember. I remember the 7th because by then I was on the floor and the iron bar had broken and I was holding half of it like a knife, and the thing was leaning over me, and I was looking at the suggestion of its face for the first time, and the face was not a stranger's face. The face was a young Varii face, a war child's, 16 maybe. The face of the kind of creche brother Taria would have had, 2 batches down. The kind who would have polished her boots once and then died in a different action a year ago and been recorded as ended. The marrow had his face because the marrow had been made out of the recorded minds of the war dead, and his recording had not been deleted. And now he was here in a refinery on a moon nobody cared about, leaning over a human sergeant with a broken bar in his hand. I said, "I'm sorry." The young Varii Marrow paused. I do not know if it was the words or the tone. I do not know if the priests are right or the engineers are right. I know that for one full second the face above me was the face of a young soldier who had heard a thing he had not heard in a long time, and that the long stretch of cold across my chest eased, fractionally, the way a held breath eases. Then Tarja, from inside the kiln, in a voice I had never heard her use before, said something in Old Varii, a formal phrase. A Kresh phrase, I think. I have asked her about it since, and she will not translate it for me. She will only say that it was the thing the Kresh mothers said over the dead to release them. A thing she had been forbidden to say, because she was not a mother and she did not have the throat for it, and because the war dead are not supposed to be released. She said it from inside a ceramic kiln on the third day of the worst week of my life, and the young Varii Marrow above me went out like a candle. There was one left. I had heard Pell call him out back wall, high fast, and I had not had time to turn. He came down off the high ledge behind the kiln, and he did not come at me, because I was bleeding on the floor and not a threat. He came at the kiln. He went for the seam I had not been able to seal, the one along the top where the screen met the ceramic, and he was halfway through it when Pell broke my one rule and came out of the kiln. He did not have a weapon. He had the optic in his left hand and the leather frog of his hornpiece in his right, and he came out of the seam at the top of the kiln in one quick scrabbling motion, and he put himself between the marrow and the inside of the kiln, and he raised the hornpiece to his mouth, and he blew the 4 notes. He blew them in the wrong order, Tarja's order, the order from the song. The marrow stopped. I do not know what it heard. I do not know if it was the notes themselves, or if it was the small Varii body of a war child holding a hornpiece against a kiln, or if it was some recording inside the thing that recognized a phrase from its own childhood that had not been allowed in any childhood the Varii had run for 200 years. I know that the marrow stopped. I know that it stood for one breath at the seam of the kiln with the ceramic between it and Tarja, and I know that in that one breath I got my feet under me, and I crossed the floor on my knees, and I drove the broken half of the iron bar up through the place where its lungs would have been, and it came apart over Pell like ash from a fire that had been wanting to go out for a long time. The room was very quiet. Pell sat on top of the kiln with the hornpiece still at his mouth. His eyes were open. He looked at me. He looked at the ash settling on his shoulders. He looked at the bar in my hand. He said I was supposed to stay inside. Yes, I said. I came out. Yes. I am sorry, Sergeant. I climbed up onto the cradle of iron and lifted him down. He weighed nothing. The shrapnel wound on his thigh had opened during the scrabble. He had torn the dressing, and he was bleeding fast and not the right color, and I knew the look of it from the ridge, and I knew there was nothing I had in the refinery that was going to fix it. I sat down on the floor with him in my lap. I put my hand over the wound. I held him. You did well, Pell, I said. Tarja, he said. I'm here, she said from inside the kiln. Her voice was perfectly steady. The steadiness of it was a thing she had done on purpose, the way a person sets down a glass with both hands to keep it from shaking. I'm here, Pelser. You have completed your function. Tarja, I do not want a function. Then you do not have one. You are Pell. You are only Pell. That is enough. That is enough. That is enough. He looked up at me. His eyes were the strange dark of the Varii inner lid sliding shut, the slow prayer closing, the closing they do when they mean it. He did not get the outer lid all the way down. He did not have the time. I sat with him on the floor of the refinery for a long while after he was gone. I do not know how long. The light through the high vents had moved a good distance across the wall before I could put him down. When I did, I put him beside the cradle, on the side closest to Tarja, and I closed both his lids with my thumb, and I took the hornpiece out of his hand, and I put it in my own breast pocket beside the folded note from the sub-commander. I did not hum the song, I could not. I tried and I could not. From inside the kiln, very softly, Tarja did. She got 6 bars. She got them with the wrong throat and the wrong resonance and in the wrong order, the way she had gotten the last 4 notes the first night, and they were a song. I went back to the Orc. I sat down. I waited for the next wave. The next wave did not come. The evacuation came at sundown on the 4th day, and it did not come from the Varii. It came from a small gray shuttle with a Salter County registration code on the underside, flown by a woman named Marisol Vega, whom I had never met and whose call sign was Crow 6, and who put down on the basin floor with the engine still hot, and walked into the refinery with her sidearm drawn and a medic behind her, and a sergeant major of the Mudfoot 32nd behind the medic. The sergeant major was named Walther Boone. He had been my squad leader once. He was 61 years old, and he had 3 teeth in his head, and he had heard the radio call I had made the previous afternoon, and he had spent the next 20 hours threatening, bribing, and stealing his way into a shuttle. He looked at me. He looked at the kiln. He looked at Tarja when I lifted the iron screen off and folded back the cradle wrap, and he looked at her armor and her rank stripe and the long dorsal wound that had stopped bleeding 2 days ago. He looked at me again. "Ravenel," he said. "Sergeant Major." "That a Varii son cohort." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "Theirs." "Was, yes, Sergeant Major." "And you are bringing her home." "Yes, Sergeant Major." Boone looked at her for a long time. The medic had already started working. Varii physiology is not human physiology, but the broad strokes are close enough. And the medic had been a Varii liaison for 6 years before she transferred out, and she knew the cord twinning and the slow pulse, and she did not hesitate. Boone watched the medic. Then Boone looked at me again, and at the iron bar lying broken on the floor, and at the 9 piles of pale dust scattered around the refinery that were the only thing the marrow leave behind when they are unmade, and at the small Varii body laid out beside the cradle with both eyes closed and a horn piece missing from its hip. 9, he said. Plus the 2 that came through the wall yesterday. Plus the 2. Yes, Sergeant Major. And the boy. A courier, Pelser, the Varii sub-commander, sent him. He came in with a thigh wound that was already bad. He died helping me kill the last one. Boone looked at Pell for a long time. The sergeant major has children of his own, grown, mostly, but children. And there is a quiet that comes over Boone when he looks at a small body that I had not seen before and have only seen twice since. "You'll bring him out too," he said. "Yes, Sergeant Major." "All 3 of you go in the shuttle." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "Sergeant Ravenel." "Yes." "You are an idiot." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "You are about to be reprimanded by every officer in this regiment, and possibly by the Varii High Command, and possibly by my wife, when she finds out I spent her brother's shuttle credit getting here." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "Pick her up. The medic will bring the boy." I picked Tarja up. The medic wrapped Pell in a thermal blanket from her pack, folding the corners the way you fold corners around something small that you have decided is going to be carried with respect, and she walked behind me with him in her arms across the basin and into the shuttle. Boone walked last with my rifle in one hand and my broken iron bar in the other. He had not asked me for them. He had simply taken them up off the floor on his way out, and was carrying them like a man carrying a friend's coat to the door. The shuttle lifted at 4 minutes past sundown. Through the back hatch before it sealed, I saw the refinery dwindling on the basin floor, white in the long light, and the 4-note horn piece played somewhere across the river, the Varii in their withdrawal formation, marching south, and I watched them go, and I did not feel anything in particular about them. Tarja's eyes were open. She was watching me. "You stayed," she said. "I did." "That is the word," she said. "In your tongue, stayed." "It's a word." It is enough of one. We were on the shuttle 36 hours. The medic worked on Tarja for the first 12 and slept for the second 12 and worked again for the third. The cord twinning was salvageable. The secondary nerve had not been cut by the marrow lance, only the primary. With graft work and time and the Variai's own ferociously good healing, she would walk again, maybe inside a year, maybe two. She would not be a Sun cohort anymore. The rank would not be returned to her. She had been recorded as ended. In Variai law, there is no path back from that recording, and the chain of command does not reverse itself for any individual. Boone explained this to her on the second day, sitting beside her in the cargo bay with his hands folded between his knees. He used the proper Variai grammar, rank first, and he used it the way a man uses a borrowed tool, carefully and without flourish. Tarja listened. When he was done, she said in her own tongue, "Then I am not Variai anymore." "No," Boone said in his. "Then what am I?" Boone thought about it. "You're a passenger on a Mudfoot shuttle, ma'am, and Sergeant Ravenel here seems to think you're worth the fuel." Tarja looked at me. I had been sitting against the bulkhead with the field tin of coffee in my lap. I had been turning it over in my hands for an hour. The factory seal was still on it. 9 months of carrying it. 9 months of not opening it because I had wanted to open it on the morning the war was won, and the war was not won, and the war was probably not going to be won in my lifetime, and the coffee was almost certainly stale by now anyway. I broke the seal with my thumb. It made the small clean sound of vacuum letting go. "What is that?" Tarja said. "It's coffee," I said. "It's a thing my people drink when they want to be awake, but they don't want to be alone." "I do not have a stomach for human food," she said. "I know." "Then why are you opening it?" "Because I should have opened it 8 months ago," I said. "Because I have been telling myself I would open it on a particular day, and I am no longer interested in telling myself that. Because it is not a song, but it will do." She looked at me a long time. Boone got up and went forward, very quietly, and left us in the cargo bay together. "Sergeant Ravenel," she said. "Eli." "Eli, when I am able to walk again, when I am no longer Variai. When I have no rank and no house and no chain of command and no hornpiece to play me into the field." "Yes." "I would like to hear the rest of the song." I sat with the open tin in my lap and the smell of 9-month-old coffee coming up out of it, and I sat with the dust of unmade marrow still under my fingernails, and the cold of the 7th one still in the place where my left thumb used to be, and the small weight of a Variai war child laid out on the medic's pallet 2 meters away, and the 4-note hornpiece still somewhere in the back of my head doing the work of fading. I sat with all of that, and I hummed the rest of the song, the full song. 12 bars, the way my mother used to do it. Tarja did not have the throat for it. But on the second pass-through, very softly, she got the last 4 notes, a different 4 notes than the hornpiece, in a different order, slower, and she got them right, and they were a song, and they were not allowed by anyone, and she did them anyway. The shuttle went on through the dark. We buried Pell on the second morning of the flight, in a small ceremony that did not exist in any regulation either of us was bound by, because the Variai do not bury their dead, and the Mudfoot do not bury anyone they did not know. Crow 6 brought the shuttle out of slip drive long enough for it. We were between systems, the kind of empty that has no name and no map grid and no one to disapprove, and Boone opened the rear hatch with a tether on his belt, and the medic stood beside him holding the small thermal-wrapped bundle, and I stood with Tarja in my arms because she had asked to be held upright for this, and Crow 6 left the cockpit and stood with us, and that was the whole ceremony. I said the small old song, the whole 12 bars. I did them quietly, the way my mother used to, and I did not falter, and when I came to the line about the morning that does not come the way you expected, I did not stop. Tarja, against my collar, said something in old Variai, the same phrase she had used on the young marrow with the war child's face, the Kresh mother phrase. The thing she had been forbidden to say, she said it twice. The second time her voice was very small. The medic let Pell go. The bundle went out into the dark behind the shuttle and did not come back, the way nothing comes back from that kind of dark, and Crow 6 closed the hatch and went forward and brought us back into slip drive, and we did not speak about it for the rest of the flight. In the years since, Tarja has not spoken about it either, not to me. I think she speaks about it to the notebook she keeps. I have not looked. I am not going to. But every year on the anniversary, when the long light comes down across the hills in the same particular way it came down across the basin that fourth day sundown, she goes out behind the kiln with the leather frog of Pell's hornpiece in her hand, and she sits on the smokehouse step and she plays the 4 notes. Tarja's order, the song's order, the notes that are not allowed by anyone. The geese have learned to be quiet for it. They sit at her feet. They do not hiss. She has gotten better at the song. She has the throat for it now, more or less. The varii throat is built wrong for humming, but the human throat can be taught a great many things, and so, it turns out, can the varii throat, if it is willing to be wrong for long enough. That was 11 years ago now. There is a small farm in Salter County, 2 ridges over from the one I grew up on, where the kiln out back is bigger than my father's was, and the tiles are better, and the geese are still mean. There is a woman who lives there with me who is taller than I am and walks with a brace on her left leg, and who has, in the years since the refinery, learned to hum. She is not varii anymore. She is not anything in the formal sense, no rank, no house, no creche, no hornpiece of her own, though Pell's hangs on a peg by the back door and she touches it every morning on her way out to feed the birds. The varii high command did not, in the end, reprimand me. They did not have to. They simply struck her name from every role she had ever appeared on, and that was their reprimand, and it was directed at her, and not at me, because the varii high command had no way of touching a Mudfoot sergeant who had not, technically, broken any Mudfoot regulation. Boone retired the next year. He sends a card at midwinter. The card always has geese on it. He has never explained why. We did get the blanket. Crow 6 did it 6 months after the refinery, on a run she was making through the regimental store on some other piece of business that I have never asked her to clarify. She walked it out in a kit bag and put it in my hands at a transfer station on the inner ring and told me she did not want to talk about how. I did not ask. The blanket is on our bed now. It is very old. It is the color a thing gets when it has been on cold sides of bunks for 15 winters and on warm sides of beds for 11 more. Tarja sleeps on it. The geese chased Tarja up onto the smokehouse roof her first spring on the farm. She was up there for an hour. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. When I went out to get her down, I found her sitting on the ridgeline with her brace stretched out in front of her and the meanest of the geese hissing up at her from the yard. And she looked down at me, and she made the breath-through-teeth sound, and she said, "I understand the geese. Yes. I understand the song. I understand the farm. I understand the kiln. I understand your mother, who I did not meet. I understand your brother, who I have met. I understand the coffee, although I still cannot drink it. Yes. I do not understand why you stayed." "You don't have to," I said. "No. It's not a thing you understand. It's a thing you do." She thought about that for a long time, up on the smokehouse roof with the goose hissing at her boots. "Then I will do it," she said. "If you are ever broken in the field, if you are ever recorded as ended, if a hornpiece plays the 4 notes over you and your own people walk past you in the long loping run. Tarja, I will stay." I helped her down off the roof. We went inside. The kiln was firing. The geese went back to their business. There is a thing my mother used to say, at the end of the bedtime song, in the last bar before the rhyme came back around. She used to say, "The morning will come and you and I will see it, and it will not be the morning we expected, and that is all right, and we will have it anyway." I have thought about that line a lot. in the years since the refinery. About what it meant when my mother said it over a tired child in a farmhouse in Salter County, and what it might have meant if she had said it over a paralyzed Varii Sun cohort in a ceramic kiln on a moon 200 light-years from home, and what it might have meant if anyone, anywhere, had thought to say it over a small Varii war child with a courier's harness and a hornpiece, and the wrong color blood pooling under his thigh on the third day of the worst week of my life. I think it meant the same thing in all three places. I think the song does not care who it is sung to. I think the morning comes for anyone who has someone sitting up through the dark with them. The Varii do not have a word for this. They will someday. Languages add words when the people who speak them learn new ones. Tarja is working on it. She has a notebook. She writes in it most evenings slowly with her good hand, while the kiln cools and the geese settle and the long light comes down across the hills. She says when she has the word she will tell me. I told her she could take her time.